In the middle of the South Pacific, as far from land as you can possibly get, lies a graveyard. Not a graveyard for people or pets. Instead, the bodies resting here belong to hundreds of broken up spacecraft and satellites. When the International Space Station gets decommissioned, it too will call this place home. But you might be wondering, is dumping all of our space junk into one spot in the ocean really a good idea? And if so, you wouldn't be alone. Some researchers and environmentalists are worried that all this debris might be taking a toll on the environment. But the alternative could be worse. The official name for this spacecraft cemetery is the South Pacific Ocean Uninhabited Area. If you wanted to get there, I don't know why you would, but if you did, you'd have to sail some 2,700 kilometers from the nearest spot of land, either the Ducie Island Atoll to the north, the islet Motunui to the northeast, or Mar Island to the south. At the middle of this graveyard is Point Nemo, which means no one in Latin, because it's literally the most isolated place in the world. All you bookworms out there have picked up on the Jules Verne link here, but for those who haven't, the name is also a nod to the character in the 1870s classic 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea's Captain Nemo. But it's not just people and land that are notably absent from the area. There might not be very many fish or other sea creatures there either. That's because Point Nemo lies within the South Pacific Gyre, a kind of ocean desert where the swirling ocean currents around it pull away most nutrients. The exact coordinates of Point Nemo weren't discovered until 1992, when Croatian-Canadian engineer Hrvoje Lukatela calculated them as a way to test some mathematical software he developed. But that actually had not stopped space agencies from dumping craft somewhere around there for decades before that. I mean, you just have to grab your closest world map placemat, and there's an obvious lack of population centers there, even if you can't pinpoint the exact spot that is furthest away from all the land. Some of the first were the Soviet Salyut space stations, starting with parts of Salyut 1 in 1971. And since the very first burial, more than 260 pieces of debris have ended up in this super remote space cemetery. But not all space objects end up there. Some, particularly satellites, are launched farther out into space into a graveyard orbit. Those are destined to circle the Earth in silence for centuries, making them future humanity's problem. Meanwhile, other objects are allowed to burn up completely in the atmosphere. This is what happened to the moon-bound Peregrine lander in early 2024 after it suffered a fuel leak and couldn't fulfill its mission anymore. In fact, even the spacecraft that do end up in the ocean break apart, and bits of themselves burn up before their remains hit the water. It usually goes something like this. Before re-entry, ground crews will adjust the trajectory of the craft so it will start breaking up over the ocean. Then, the craft will get a little kick from its own thrusters. Below an altitude of 600 kilometers or so, atmospheric drag will start to slow the object down, lowering its orbit and increasing gravity's pull on it. As it is hurtling toward its watery grave, an intense pressure wave eventually forms the proverbial bow, and the air molecules form a plasma hot enough to melt or even vaporize much of the spacecraft. This typically starts around 110 kilometers, but it really gets going at what's called the nominal breakup altitude, 78 kilometers above the Earth. And finally, the parts that are sufficiently dense or were purposefully designed to be superheat resistant end up splashing down near Point Nemo. Just how much of a craft ends up in the water depends on a bunch of factors, including what it's made out of. For example, around 6 to 19% of the ISS is expected to survive re-entry. But this careful maneuvering doesn't always go as planned. In 1991, Salyut 7 accidentally overshot its target and wound up disintegrating over Argentina. Now, obviously, having hunks of metal fall near people isn't great, but some researchers are now saying that having them plop into the ocean isn't great either, and for a couple of reasons. Now, for one thing, there's evidence that when used rockets and satellites burn up during re-entry, they release metal that hangs around in the atmosphere. A study from 2023 found that about 10% of the aerosol particles in Earth's stratosphere contain aluminum, lithium, copper, and lead, presumably from the corpses of satellites. Scientists are especially worried about that aluminum, since it could trigger a series of chemical reactions reactions that winds up destroying ozone molecules in our atmosphere. As you may recall, we've already had a hard time fixing that hole in the ozone layer caused by the other stuff we've leaked into the atmosphere. These metal aerosols could also change how atmosphere scatters light, traps and releases heat, and forms ice molecules. Basically, they would mess with how our atmosphere functions. Now, when it comes to the other dangers of spacecraft dumping, there haven't been any studies directly assessing them, so take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. But one worry is that chunks that splash down could damage the seafloor or whatever's living there. Remember I said that there isn't much living around Point Nemo? Well, our understanding of what dwells down there is kind of murky. And even though a 1996 NASA report said that the impact, quote, would be expected to be small, end quote, we don't really have much evidence that backs that up. Metal chunks aside, spacecraft are also full of other substances that could be much worse. Many rocket boosters use hydrazine, which is highly toxic to living organisms, including aquatic life. In people, hydrazine can lead to liver damage, impaired brain functioning, and stomach bleeding, all stuff I don't want. However bad these risks may be, they all kind of rely on pieces of debris staying put. But that also might not be the case. At least one scientist has suggested that the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, the Humboldt Current, and the West Wind Drift are all moving some of our space junk closer to Antarctica. No one has put a tracker on any of the debris to see where it's going, but early unpublished studies show it's becoming more and more likely to find chemicals, plastic, or metal from space debris in the waters of the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. So the stuff that wasn't supposed to be close to anyone or anything might now be edging closer to wildlife and people, which might make you wonder if there might be a better way. At least for now, letting most of the spacecraft burn up and then dumping the rest near Point Nemo is kind of the only viable option. Just letting the pieces drift around in orbit would add to the more than 9,000 metric tons of space junk floating around up there. All that debris increases the risk that a piece could hit functioning satellites and spacecraft, as well as make it harder to launch future spacecraft. For anybody who remembers the moment in WALL-E, where that adorable boxy robot hitches a ride to space and the ship bursts through a field of defunct satellites completely unscathed, reality is not like that. Everything in orbit up there is actually traveling thousands of kilometers an hour. From WALL-E's perspective, it's raining car-sized bullets sideways. To avoid at least one part of that dystopian future, space agencies and private companies are already trying to stop putting more junk into space and are actively trying to clean up what's already there. Meanwhile, at least when it comes to what to do with the big projects like the ISS, NASA plans to bring some parts back to display in museums. But disassembling a whole space station in space and ferrying it down to Earth would be way too costly and would mean we'd have to build a whole new spaceship for the job, so they still have to worry about disposing of the bulk of it. The good news is space agencies are aware of the space junk problem, but for now at least, spacecraft and satellites will keep ending up near Point Nemo, and we can only hope that most of them will travel exactly 0 leagues under the sea, staying as far away from everything else as we can manage.